Good morning, and I'm going to go ahead and go fairly quickly here. I know that we're running a little bit late, and I am between you and your lunch. I'm going to talk a little bit about some ways that you can leverage the results of the residential retrofit cost effectiveness analysis report, and also the cost effectiveness explorer to build support for a proposed policy. With all of the wildfires and hurricanes and the recent IPCC report and just so many different things going on, and the climate crisis being pretty much very apparent these days, it's tempting to really hyper focus on the end goal and really just look to the quickest and most direct route to it and see if we can get there, which would be, of course, to retrofit everything now. Unfortunately, when we have that kind of a focus, it can kind of obscure some really good options that might be in our peripheral vision. And so I'm going to talk today a little bit about what some of those options might be. While we know that there are some jurisdictions and some individuals that are ready to move, ready to completely retrofit their entire home, and also some jurisdictions that are ready to mandate some retrofits, not everybody's ready, as we've heard today, even amongst ourselves, the firm believers, no question about it. Not all of us have made that move either. And so we're beginning to take steps, but not everybody's ready for an entire, a really, really big step. So what I want to do today is, what I do know, I should say, is that we can no longer afford to do nothing. None of us can afford that anymore. And so what I want to propose is that we shift our focus just a little bit to a very short-term goal of finding some common ground for a policy to enable action. At least to require that people go at least one step beyond the minimum requirements. Okay. So we did this residential retrofit analysis, and I'm not going to talk about the specifics of the analysis today. There's a lot of information about that available. But what we did is we modeled an existing single family home, and we applied a whole bunch of different kinds of measures to that home, a bunch of energy efficiency measures, packages of measures, PV, battery storage, electrification measures, demand flexibility, such as storage and heat pump water heating flexibility. And what pops out are a bunch of data on savings, costs, and emission, and a very long report, which I'm aware can be both overwhelming and frankly under-inspiring. And so want to just take a look at that data and see if we can identify some nuggets in there, things that we might be able to use. So from that data, there are many different, there's a lot of different knowledge we can glean from the data. And so if you're developing an ordinance, this data, the structure and the inherent flexibility that is in this kind of an ordinance structure would allow you, I think, if you're looking at this from a common ground lens, allows us to address nearly all concerns. Because there's just a ton of flexibility in the options here. And so it's something that we need to kind of just be aware of. There's a whole bunch of different triggers one could initiate. You have a trigger at a remodel, time of sale, time of listing. You could have a date certain requirement where you set a date in the future and everybody must upgrade their houses by that time. There's a lot of different ways you could structure those triggers within those big categories as well. You could also have there's a full range of stringency options. You could go from perhaps a tiered requirement. Perhaps bigger projects are required to do more, like Piedmont has. They have the smaller projects only have to do one measure, larger projects do two. There's ways you could also vary the actual requirements. You could have very low cost and often low impact, but low cost options to actually having the ordinance pursue a majority of the cost effective savings potential. So there's just a huge variety and range of stringency that you can employ here. And so, any questions that you have about that, you can address that. If a question is about incremental cost, you can focus more on less stringent options or less expensive options. Another option is to specify the measures that you want. You could specify those, such as Piedmont's done. You could offer options or with just a couple of options like that. Or another example would be in Santa Monica. They have an ordinance that requires PV systems on additions. Or you could offer a flexible path and allow permit applicants to select measures that make sense for their project. So there's a whole bunch of different ways you could do this. But beyond just developing an ordinance, the Explorer can help you visualize some of these possibilities. So I'm going to go to a screenshot of the Explorer. I'm not going to talk through all of these, but I'm just going to talk through some of the things to steal from one of my favorite interactive museums, the Exploratorium in San Francisco, to do and to notice about this. This screen shows results from the city of Vacaville in Climate Zone 12, Solano County. And it has results for existing low-rise residential buildings, a single family. And this result is for an older home, homes built before 1978. The Explorer allows you to sort all of this information on any one of these categories. So you can sort things to address whatever your question is. If you're wondering what's the most cost-effective measure, you can sort by that. You can sort by either the benefit to cost ratio or simple payback and get those answers. They're a little bit different sometimes. If you're looking for what's the least expensive measure that's still cost-effective, you can sort here. Same thing with the bill savings. How much am I going to save? How many units, and also emissions. In addition, the Explorer allows you to create a couple of different policy types and compare them so that you can actually determine the impacts of different changes in your ordinance. For example, you could determine the impact of a different penetration rate. So if you change the trigger and more homes will be required to meet the ordinance, then you can see what that impact would be. You could also determine the impact of waiting 3 years for the state to upgrade the state code and see what the difference would be. A couple of other things to notice here, though, are that there's quite a long list of cost-effective measures here in Climate Zone 12, and this is only the beginning of the list. So there's really a lot of options that are really good choices for a homeowner to make with respect to energy savings and financially as well. And so there's a couple of things I wanted to just point out about this data here. Is if you look out here, the most cost-effective option in this list is sealing your ducts. And Christine Condon mentioned earlier that she actually tested her ducts at her house and had a 35% leakage. That is not uncommon. As amazing as it is, 25 to 35% linkage is a very common number. And so to just put that in perspective, that is a third of your heating and cooling energy off the top that doesn't make it to your house. It just is wasted into your attic, under the floor. So it's a huge impact.
Yes, we have about one more
minute.
Here.
Okay,
yeah.
Perfect. Okay, the measure also has a pretty small incremental cost relatively though. And so I wanted to compare that with the PV measure down at the bottom here. Also very cost effective. About 10 times the incremental cost though. And if we look over to the right, what we see is that both of these measures actually produce a similar amount of emission savings. Not exactly the same, but similar. And so if emission savings is your goal, and perhaps incremental cost is a huge concern, one of the options you might have is to simply require duct sealing. Another option there would be to offer flexible options. So you could require that people achieve a similar amount of savings. And in climate zone 12, that could be by installing attic insulation, wall insulation, new ducts, air sealing, PV system, or they could change out their HVAC or water heating systems to heat pump systems. All of those measures would apply. So you'd give somebody a lot of range. So my point here is that you could offer a bunch of different options. So if there is a concern on one level, there are a lot of ways that you can adjust the structure of the ordinance or adjust the requirements to address that. And so I did want to mandate, just to reiterate, that with some creative thinking, we can find common ground. And I believe that we can find enough common ground to support action in actually in every jurisdiction, at least some action. Lastly, I just want to say that even if you don't use this information for an ordinance, it can be used to begin the conversation. Or even if you just say required just changing out the light bulbs, screw in light bulbs, change them all to LED. I know that's a very difficult thing to enforce, even if you didn't enforce it. And I'm not suggesting that that's a good idea, but it would still enable you to have the conversation with applicants and to begin educating them, to begin developing that awareness, and also to educate them about the various options that are available to them and what might make sense in their house. I just want to say there are a lot of options, and I do think that taking one step beyond just the minimum requirements is probably a doable level for everybody. Happy to help you with exploring any of these options as you move forward. Thanks.